Ma'am, for some reason, the document I have of the last class, I'm not able to share. I think it's because it's document.
You mean the PPT of the last class?
Yes, ma'am. I don't know why. Like I have it saved, but the option is not showing of sharing it. Yeah, I'll just try.
Should I resend?
Yes, ma'am. Please. I'll try again if you resend.
Maybe when you could share your screen instead of that presentation, then it doesn't matter. It is a document.
Yeah, I'll just try what you said.
Yeah, that works. All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can I request at least some of you to put on your cameras like we agreed? And Chanel, if you can move to, yeah, to the later slides. I think maybe the last. Yeah, here. This is good. Thanks. Thank you, Kuldeep. Others, can you please? Okay, so I need some more cameras on, please. Kuldeep is the only one who's put his camera on.
No, ma'am. I've also put my camera on.
I don't know why I can't see. Okay, now I can see the view. All right, so let's begin. So, we were discussing in the last class what it means to have and to take on a sociological imagination. And what I was saying is that it's important. Um, um, One of the important lessons in doing sociology is about trying to develop this sociological imagination, and the key sort of focus in understanding what this sociological imagination is that we need to think about connecting the public and the private. So anything that we would consider to be a private trouble is actually has a larger connection to something that is a public issue. So I gave examples of, let's say, unemployment. An individual may experience, all the sort of depression and difficulties associated with unemployment in their own life. But at some point, when we look at unemployment as a phenomenon in this individual life, when we're doing sociology, we must connect it to the larger sort of societal structural conditions. So it's if I think about what is sociological imagination, it's actually a form of self-consciousness, a form of self-consciousness that allows us to make these sorts of connections, that allows us to not frame our understanding of issues and things just in terms of what is visible, just in terms of what we can see. So once you start relating the public and the private, once you start relating whatever you're observing to a larger context, to something more structural, you can actually see different sides of the same phenomenon. So, what C. Wright Mills did was that he sort of made this distinction between private troubles and public issues, and showed us how doing sociology will enable us to actually connect these two. So troubles are sort of specific to individual lives, to the character of individuals, and to the individual's relationship with others. And the resolution of troubles, you would think, lies within the scope of your own milieu. So that, if I have an individual troubles, it is something that I will be able to take care of by looking at my own context, the context that is directly open to individual experience. So in that sense, and your immediate local environment that are not limited to the immediate local environment. It is really the organization of many such milieus. So if I think of of a private trouble as one personal milieu, you have several such milieus, and issues pertain to several such milieus, and you can think of them in terms of larger institutions. So if I think of a loss of unemployment, I can connect it to, again, to loss of jobs, to the factory and to industry as a sort of larger setup, and finally also to, let's say, broadly to the economy as such. So so what when we look at issues, then we are trying to see how these personal milieus, how these local environments actually overlap and interpenetrate each other. So if I, again, going back to the example of unemployment, I can look at immediate context of the family, etc., and the troubles the person is going through, and then I can connect it to several other contexts. So for instance, when I look at unemployment in the context of COVID-19, I can look at it in, I must think of it in terms of the pandemic. I must think of it in terms of people who had originally migrated for jobs going back to their source of going back to their places of origin. I must look at the impact of the lockdown. So you see that there are different milieus that come into the picture when I think of unemployment in the context of COVID-19. And there are different social institutions. So, the workplace, the family, the state, the economy, all of those institutions interpenetrate each other. All of those institutions have an impact on each other. And it is this impact that then shapes what my personal experience is going to be, right? So if you think about the discussion around, what happened, let's say, with the first lockdown, that that migrant labor really suffered because of the way in which the lockdown was declared. So you can imagine that now one decision, which is a policy decision, how it affects the milieus, the private troubles of all these people. Now, when that one decision was taken, actually the context of the private lives were not really could not be imagined. So if you have that kind of sociological imagination, then policy also can be very different, because then you would probably think that this is what would happen, right? The fact that when nothing was available, people were walking back home, right? So people walked for walked through unimaginable distances. So then the issue, as we are articulating it, is a public matter, and the troubles are private matters. So when we are trying to make these connections, what we want to do is ask questions such as what is the structure of a particular society? When I think of a society, what is the structure of the society as a whole? What are its different components? So how can I arrive at this this context of a public issue, or how can I look at a public milieu? And for this, I need to understand what the components are. So in any given context, whether I say unemployment, whether I say poverty, whether I say suicide, in any given context, or I say farmers' protest, any social phenomenon that I'm trying to understand, I have to be aware of the different components which will interpenetrate each other. So when I think of the farmers' protest, again, that there are different components. There's the economy, there is agriculture, there is there's land and access to land, and so on. And then once you think of these components, you think about how they are related to one another, and how structures differ from one another, right? So the first part that you're looking at is the structure and its components, and the relationship between different structural components to each other. The second thing that you're looking at is historically, how does this human society stand? So now again, when I have to look at the context of let's say poverty, or if I have to look at the context of industrial development, the way in which I would do it for India, if I have to say industrial development in India, would be very different from industrial development in America or Europe and so on. So there is a historical context within which we are all situated, within which these structures are situated. And so when we think of the sociological imagination, when we think of these sorts of connections that we're trying to make, that historical context becomes important. What is the place and meaning for humanity, for the human condition in a particular context? What have the processes of change been? So again, I know that in the Indian context, if I'm looking at anything, I cannot look at it without understanding the colonial situation. So that many of for instance, our rules and laws were actually made in the colonial period, so that when we think of what is happening in the here and now, we connect it in some ways. There is a connection historically to what happened in the colonial period. So we are looking at what are the particular features of a particular historical period, and so there is again a two-way relationship between the historical period and the effects that it leaves behind. And finally, what we are saying is what kinds of human beings prevail, what kinds of human beings are present in society, and what do they do? So that in what ways in what ways do they exist? So are they liberated? Are they repressed? What is the kind of human nature that is revealed in the process of trying to understand human society. So these three aspects: the structure, secondly the historical context, and thirdly the nature of human beings. And these three aspects are what will enable us to grasp the relationship between history and biography. Will enable us to grasp the relationship between um, grasp the relationship between the private troubles and public issues. Um, so okay, so now therefore, when you think of sociological imagination, and we think of why do we need it, we need it because we don't want to apply, when we're doing sociology, we don't want to apply our own lens to looking at the conditions of others' private troubles. So if now I'm going back to the example of migrant labor and COVID-19, if I apply, and there were several, I don't know whether you you followed some of the discussions at that point, but there were several sort of interesting ways in which the contrast between middle class and upper middle class people locked down in their homes, and migrant labor who could not be locked down in the same way. Who did not, I mean, for them it was about it was about survival, right? So there were several sort of ways in which this distinction this distinction was being made apparent. So so the reason that we need to develop this sociological imagination is so that we do not employ our own lenses, our own the understanding of our own context to other context. So one is that how do I understand my own context? If I have to understand my private milieu, my private troubles, I must relate it to, as I said, the larger institutions and so on. But in my context, my relationship to larger institutions and to history and so on will be very different from somebody else's, right? So then the specific institutional forces, the specific historical ideas, there may be a commonality, but they will also be different. The way in which they interpenetrate each other will be different for different individuals. So sociological imagination is important in order to be aware, in order to respect and to understand this cultural difference. So it's about trying to build empathy, and you will see that we are actually going to do 2 tutorial meetings on this topic. In the first one, what we are doing this week, I have shared with you a video called, it's called Ways of Seeing. So what does it mean for us to, it shows us what it means for what observation is, and we will try to relate that video and the context of that video to understanding what we observe as sociologists. And in the next class, in the next tutorial meeting, we're going to talk about this aspect, the awareness of the other, the awareness of and respect for cultural difference, right? Sociological imagination is important because we need to develop this kind of awareness, respect, and understanding for the other. Because in sociology, what we are studying is the condition of people's lives. And if I'm studying the condition of life of migrant labor in the context of COVID-19 with the same tools and same sort of approach that I would use to study the lives of middle class Indians, let's say, it would not work. So I would have to as it were, fit into the shoes of the migrant labor in order to understand what that context is and what sorts of institutional spaces and ideas interpenetrate each other for the migrant labor. So, so what it leads to is, as I said in the last class as well, that doing sociology generally leads to a heightened awareness of yourself. So it's really about an increased understanding of the self, a process of self-enlightenment. And it is this process of self-enlightenment that also helps us to understand the other. So as you know, Mills was writing at a time, I said this in the previous class, that he was writing at a time when he was a bit disillusioned with the way scholars were studying sociology, with the way that, you know, with the place that the sociologist and the social scientist was taking in society. So he felt that it's important to put down the ideas of who is a good scholar and how can you do good sociology and be a good social scientist. And according to him, having this sociological imagination is fundamental to being a good scholar. And you can have this sociological imagination by actually, as he said, not splitting work from life. So you know, it's like the feminist slogan, the personal is political. So your life and your work, they're not separate from each other. There is a kind of unity that you have to accept. He says that, you know, so therefore, everything that happens, you know, so if I'm a sociologist of family, marriage, and kinship, and I want to understand, you know, life in the family, my own life in my own family is not separate from trying to develop an understanding. It's part of how I understand things. So therefore, it's important for the sociologist to sort of maintain a kind of record of personal, professional, and intellectual experiences. And as you do that, you engage in a thoughtful review of your own experiences. So partly sociological imagination is about creating this awareness in yourself, and at the same time trying to analyze what is going on in your own life, how you can relate what is going on in your own life to a larger social historical context. Next slide, please. So these are the sort of things that I'm not going to read them out here. They're just, I'll share this slide with you anyway. So basically, it's really about trying to build this kind of imagination. One of the things he says there, in fact, is that you know, how do you what I was trying to say earlier, that you have to have this willingness to understand and view the world from the perspective of the other. So you have to be able to fit into others' shoes, right? If I don't fit into the shoes, for instance, of migrant labor, I could say that, you know, you know, from my perspective, I would say that trying to walk back home in the middle of a pandemic, you know, is not appropriate behavior, right? It should not have been done. But if I begin to view the world from the perspective of migrant labor, I can see the constraints that migrant labor was working under, right? And I can understand that that is really really about a struggle for survival, right? So there was this thing that, you know, if one doesn't die of the virus, one would die of hunger for many of for many of the people who were dependent on this kind of, let's say, daily wage laborers and so on. Now the one of the last things that I want to mention here, which is the last point on this slide, is the idea of language and how language is important. And when we do sociology, again, this is important. This is something that I think we all struggle with, and you will realize that as you're writing your tutorial notes and your answers and so on, that you know, your ideas and how you analyze something is built around how you express things. So it's important to, so I may be able to view the world from the perspective of the other, but if I'm not able to use that language to express that view, it will it's a deadened imagination, right? So you cannot make those connections, you cannot have that sociological imagination unless you also focus on language. So a large part of what we do in sociology is also to sort of to translate thought, feeling, and so on into the written word. And therefore the written word, the language that I use, that becomes that also becomes very very significant in how I'm trying to communicate something, how I'm trying to communicate these connections. Next slide, please. So yeah, so this is more or less, I think, yeah, this is all in terms of could you make this larger?
Yes, just a second.
So let's, while this is coming up, do you have any questions, anybody? Is this more or less clear to everybody?
Ma'am,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go
Ma'am,
ahead.
basically I didn't understand the word, the technical word milieu that we used frequently.
Environment. Milieu is environment. Your
Okay.
immediate environment.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So as I was saying, that if you think of yourself in terms of your family, your educational context, your own history, that's your milieu. But there are many such, that's your environment. There are many such environments. There are many such milieus, right? And they're all very different. So for instance, you know, I'm from Bengal and I moved to Delhi several years ago. So there is in my life, or in if you were to understand my life, you have to look at sort of you know, the fact that I moved from Bengal. You have to look at history in Bengal. You have to, so that my being here in Delhi, as in that sense, you know, having migrated from Bengal to here, as opposed to somebody who's been born and brought up in Delhi, right? The lives and the environment will be very, very different, right? I have another place to go back home to, and you know, I'm not, in that sense, I'm always going to feel like I'm not from this city, right? I have another home. So I think that um, for me, migration is a context. It's part of my milieu. It's part of my environment. It may not be for somebody else, right?
Yes, ma'am, I understood completely. Thank you.
So, okay, let's move to the first few slides in this PPT, I think, are relate to sociological imagination. They're a recap, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Yeah. Next. This is all done. Next. Done. Yeah, here. So I want to now discuss the origins of sociology a little bit. Look at the sort of, again, larger context in which the discipline emerged. And then end by just giving you a sense of three broad sort of theoretical trajectories in the discipline. But firstly, I think, the history of the discipline is connected to three revolutionary movements that we'll be, or movements, not, sorry, moments that we will be discussing. First is Enlightenment, second, the French Revolution, and third, the Industrial Revolution. Now, for the next class, what I want all of you to do is to just, because there's a lot of resource on all of these three things, but I just want you to go online, look up what each of these things mean, and come to class. So we can just have a quick, short discussion on what you've understood, and then we can carry on. But anyway, I'm going to discuss them here today. So the term sociology was coined by Auguste Comte in 1838, who is considered to be like the father of sociology. He was a French sociologist who was responding really to the kind of normlessness and lawlessness in French society at the time. Now, why this normlessness and why this lawlessness? Again, it's connected to the sort of social condition in France at the time. Now, what Auguste Comte was trying to do was to say that just like we study the natural world, we need to have a discipline, and we need to have certain methods, theories, and concepts that are going to be used to study the social world in a similar way. So he's saying that really that scientific principles can be developed and can be used in order to study the social world. And studying the social world would mean that we can understand and discover certain laws of our social world, right? So can you tell me what the laws of the natural world are? Are there certain laws of the natural world? Anybody?
Ma'am, what do you meant by the laws of natural world, ma'am? Like, it is something which is trivial that is happening usually from the past till then.
So in science, if you think of science, what are the basic laws that we learn about?
Survival of the fittest.
Newton's law, gravity.
Yeah. So you have gravity, you have Newton's law. So those are all the these are sort of fundamental laws about how things operate in the natural world, right? So we don't, and these have come to us through a sort of process of discovery, observation, discovery, and analysis, right? And then you come up with a law. So similarly, like, just if you think of gravity and the way and the story around how the laws of gravity came to be what they are today, what Comte was saying, that similarly we can discover laws about the social world, right? We can discover laws about how we relate to each other, right? Now, the problem with laws of the social world is that is in terms of the general applicability of the law, right? Is there anything that is that applies to everyone, that applies to the entire human condition and human race, just as we think about the natural law? So I can't, gravity is something that is, the laws of gravity is something that is fundamental. It applies to all of us. It applies to all contexts. So the kind of universality that is present in some of these laws of the natural world universality and also reliability that is present with the understanding of these natural laws or laws of the natural world. Uh, that to attain that universality and reliability and validity with regard to the laws of the social world is difficult. So that is part of the problem with with sociology as a discipline. But what Coate was trying to do was to say that that we can in fact discover laws, that we can take a scientific view of how society operates, how individuals live, behave, act, think in society. And so he's really saying that this is what the science of society has to do. It has to build on a scientific view of society. So, so for him, he coined this term social physics. So again, you see that the whole focus is really on trying to sort of, and it's important to see how language is being used, right? Because, you know, so physics, it's you take a term from the natural sciences and you say social physics, which is that there are two aspects to social physics. According to Coate, social statics and dynamics. Statics is that which remains as is, and dynamics that which is constantly in a process of motion or shift or change, right? So when I think of the laws of social life, I have to consider these aspects, that which remains stable and unchanging, and that part of life which is dynamic. Now, for Coate, what was important is that there are sort of three stages that he's. Can you just move to the previous slide? Last part, yeah. Three stages that society passes through: the theological, the metaphysical, and the positive. The theological is really where it's governed by this belief in God. So the laws of the social world are actually explained through this belief in God, through religion. That's the way in which we make sense of this world. Metaphysical, the only shift that happens is that you tend to you tend to explain things in terms of abstract entities. So, for instance, I could I say that, you know, I could sort of make the shift. I mean, it's not theological in the sense that there is sort of complete fallback on God as the explanation, religion is the explanation, but there are some abstract entities which you use to describe or to understand what is going on in the world. So an abstract entity, for example, could be fate, right? So fate as a way of understanding the human condition, understanding what's happening. And finally, the positive stage, which is what Coate was very interested in, where he says that you can, it's a stage where scientific, rational principles, reason becomes important. So it's not God, it's not sort of abstract entities, but it is through observation, through reason, that you can arrive at the explanations for what is happening in society. Yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah. Now, because I've come to this context of, I'm introducing the idea of reason, you know, I want to talk a little bit about enlightenment. So I said that, you know, one of the revolutionary moments is when you look at the history of the discipline of sociology, comes from enlightenment, which is the process which is a moment, a process where there was a questioning of the main ideas in society, where there was a challenge to the existing views drawing from religious principles. Two major philosophers were Rousseau and Locke, who were thinkers associated with the Enlightenment. So if you think of the Middle Ages, you know, if you look historically at that point, then, you know, it was again religion and God which is used to explain most things. there is the church and the state, but the state draws its power from the church, right? So the people of power, the people who held positions of power, were actually in some ways connected to the church. The basic idea of enlightenment is that um, that there was that all human beings had certain natural rights, and the way in which society was being organized around religion, that some of these basic natural rights were being violated, right? And for that, so you have a context where you see reason, you use reason to say that, okay, all individuals in society are not being able to fulfill their lives in the same way, right? So you're using reason to try and then question the existing order, and then saying that this existing order needs to be dismantled. That is, we need another idea with which to organize society. So you had religion as the dominant idea. You had God and faith in God as the dominant idea to institute a certain kind of order in society, right? And then you felt that, okay, this is not working out. Um, you know, even though you have faith in God and all of this is, you know, you're doing whatever is needed in order to fulfill that faith in God, and yet your lives of people are very, very different, right? So some people lived in misery and some didn't, and that is what made you then question that existing order. Next slide, please. So
Can I ask just one small
sure,
question?
sure.
Ma'am, just previously when you are explaining the basic idea of enlightenment, you said that we have to look at the theological perspective of the society, and
Yeah,
then we have to connect to the religious world.
yeah.
So, and then you told that we have to look back at the history, and then look that people were very religious, and in order you explain. So what you are trying to say is just to explain the theological perspective by looking at the history of society. Is
So,
it that? So can you
so,
just please
so what
explain?
I think there are two different things, because of the way in which I presented them, it may have been a little confusing. The first is that I was trying to bring in the ideas of Auguste Comte, who is the French sociologist who's considered to be the sort of founding father of sociology. According to him, he says that I can look at society in terms of three stages. The first is theological. So before enlightenment, you had the theological stage where um, the guiding principle of human lives is provided by faith in God through religion. So how is society organized? Society is organized through religion. What is the dominant institution? It is one of the dominant institution is the church, right? So yeah. So now, but when I think of forget the metaphysical stage, but theological to positive. So he says theological, metaphysical, and then positive. So if I just for now forget about the metaphysical, but what I'm saying is that with enlightenment, you made this shift from the theological to the positive, because in the process of enlightenment, if I think of enlightenment as a movement, what happened is this blind faith in God was being questioned, because there were several people who, despite their faith in God, were not meeting the basic sort of rights of human beings, were not able to fulfill the basic rights of human beings, right? So because of that, now how did people realize this? People realized this because they used reason and rationality. So rationalism and emancipation, these are the two characteristics of enlightenment. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, I understood.
Yeah. So the two characteristics of enlightenment then is that you privilege human reason, you privilege the capacity of the human mind to reason. So it's that how do I understand how things work? In the theological state, I understand how things work through the application of religion, through my faith in God. But when I think of rationality, when I think of rationalism, then I know that my capacity to think is what will lead me to understanding how things work. So it's really, and so sociologically, this is fascinating, and I can connect it to the sociological imagination by saying that, look, your capacity to think and my capacity to think, they're different, and they often come up with different sorts of results. So the fact is that in the context of enlightenment, when I privileged human reason, it enabled me to see that the condition of all people's lives were not the same, right? That despite their truth and despite their faith in God, there were people who were living in misery, there were people who were oppressed, there was, so when you put human mind as the source of truth, when you put reason as a way of understanding what is happening, you actually sort of begin to question the existing social order. So these two characteristics, rationalism and emancipation from conditions of oppression. The first is recognizing that you were oppressed, and second, and that your rights were not being met, and the very bringing in a context of rights. All of that came with the application of reason. And second, then saying, okay, what do we do about it? Right? We have to, there has to be the imagination of another kind of society. So so that there were, in the theological state, then there were self-imposed restrictions that hindered the use and development of reason, right? And you had to be emancipated from that, which meant that people were able to think for themselves, right? So you went to church, you were told what you had to do, and you were told what is right and wrong, and you followed that, what is right and wrong. So, later on when it'll be interesting for you when we also discuss, for instance, Max Weber and this whole idea of religion and how religion impacted capitalist development. So you'll see how what powerful ideas were contained in this faith in God. But we'll take that up later. But you can, make a note of Weber's work as a way of understanding the place of religion in human society. So what Enlightenment did, therefore, was to challenge these self-imposed restrictions and to enable people to think for themselves. Yes, next slide, please. So, yeah. So then, what comes up is the belief in the capacity of reason. The belief in the capacity of reason. But how do you reason? You reason first by you observe, right? In order to reason, I need to see. I observe, and that's empirical research. I need to observe, and then once I observe, I also I am able to compare. So when I look at my life, again, going back to the example of migrant labor, my life and the life of the migrant laborer, again, I'm able to compare. So and then through that, you hope that you can exercise some kind of control over the universe, over your social condition. And this kind of reasoning and research and understanding then brings us to certain laws through which our social world is being governed. So we can arrive at certain laws, or by way of understanding how the social world operates. But for what is important is that in the social world, the understanding of these laws, or when we come up with these laws, when we arrive at these laws, they're used to create a better rational world. So our focus is really on creating a better rational world. Now, going back to C. Wright Mills, this is precisely what he was saying. He was saying that somewhere sociology had lost its plot. And its plot was really creating this better rational world. And so you were understanding society in order to change it. Again, if I go back to enlightenment, that is why did we think of human reason as important? Because we realized that with this faith in God, society was not about an equitable distribution. There was a lot of hardship that many people were facing. More people, a fewer people had access to more resources, and so on. So what C. Wright Mills felt was that sociology as a discipline and the understanding in that discipline was not being used to create a better world. And so in some senses, he was critical of the fact that sociologists were not doing what they had set out to do, right? So so then this mission to weed out that which is irrational, to overcome your irrational beliefs and embrace reason and rationality was really the sort of was at the center of enlightenment, and that's why it's called a revolutionary moment, because it was able to completely change change the way in which we thought of society, we thought of our place in society. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so now if you go back to when I think I had put a date on for Auguste Comte in terms of the beginnings of the discipline, and it was sometime in the 1830s, right? Now here what I'm doing is I'm looking at, so I said Enlightenment, and now we're looking at French Revolution. And as you know, Auguste Comte was a French sociologist. He was writing at the time when he was very disillusioned with what was happening in French society, right? And basically that in 1789 you have the sort of dissolution of the end of the ancient regime, or what is this sort of absolute monarchy in France. Now, I mean, from those of you who know a little bit of the history, French society had these three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the ordinary people. So you really, you had the king, but the king was somebody who had been given the right to rule by God. So it was really, the king was God's representative. Now, the ordinary people, as you know, were the ones who, who suffered in silence for several years. Some of that, I don't know whether you're, if you're interested, again, you can look at some of the figures from that time, and just to get a sense of what French society was like. And there are also lots of films that you can look at. But basically, the idea here is that you had a feudal regime. Now, do you know what a feudal regime is? So it meant that the king, in order to govern a particular territory, would have this group of nobles, right? So land was given to these nobles, and then the relationship between the king, the nobility, and the ordinary people was in terms of access to that land. So it was the ordinary people who were the cultivators, who were working the land, and in order to be able to work the land, they had to pay taxes and fees and so on, right? So pretty, as you know of the sort of, in some senses, you would know of the Indian feudal system. It was pretty much along the same lines, where these sorts of patron-client relationships were created between the ordinary people and the nobles, the lord and the serf. So it was this feudal regime that was oppressive for the ordinary people, again because of the uneven distribution of resources. And it is, the ideas of the French Revolution were really attacking this regime. Why? Again, it's connected to enlightenment, where when you use human reason, you see that this is an oppressive situation, and the rights of human beings, the right to liberty, to equality, to property, and the right to resist. This was the Declaration of Rights of Human Beings. And this is what the French Revolution was about, to instate these rights as fundamental to all human beings. And of course, instating these rights meant that there was a kind of, that monarchy, that absolute monarchy, had to be dismantled. So you see that it was a shift from one big idea to another, right? So the one big idea of faith in God and faith in religion, and faith in God as the way of organizing society. There was a shift from that to reason as a way of understanding human society and the human condition. But obviously, because of this big shift, there was chaos and disorder, right? So you had the monarchy for like several years, and then suddenly you were in the midst of a situation where you didn't, it was like, what after the monarchy? So this process of rebuilding, society had to be rebuilt according to these new ideas. And how, so it created a kind of a sense of disorder and chaos within society. And it is this disorder and chaos that sociologists were responding to. So Auguste Comte arrives onto the scene at this point and says, okay, we need a way of understanding the social world, right? And this is a situation of chaos. So you see, I think in my in the first class, I talked about this whole question of social order. So social order becomes central to what sociology is trying to do and what sociologists are interested in. And you will see this question of order coming back again and again in what we do through the course. So I want to leave you with this thought that social order is actually central to how to what we try to do in what our intent is in the discipline of sociology. So we talked about enlightenment and we talked about the French Revolution. As I said before, I want each of you to read up, if not on all three, but at least on one, read up a little bit more. And in the next class, we will have a quick discussion on these three. And then the third thing that that is central to looking at the history of the discipline is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, again, can't be sort of pinned down to a single event, but it's basically that process of transformation of European Western society from agriculture to manufacturing. Now, along with this shift from agriculture to manufacturing, agriculture as the sort of mainstay of people's lives, to factory work as the mainstay of people's lives. Along with this transformation, there were several other changes that were taking place, right? Now, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is considered to be is tied to, typically linked to the discovery of the steam engine and the use of the steam engine. And That, you know, that's the sort of first sort of technology. And then you had several new technologies which were used in the process of production and in revolutionizing transport. So the one aspect was sort of transport and sort of bringing people, things, etc., together, closer together. And the second aspect was the production of goods, so that, you know, you had technology. Now, in the production of goods, you had technology, and it enabled you to produce quickly, but also enabled you to produce more. So one of the key features of the industrial phase or the industrial revolution is mass production of goods, right? Now mass production of goods, because it was possible to distribute. It was now possible to distribute. So if you think of agricultural society, if you think of what was the mode of production there, it was what is called the domestic mode of production. Domestic mode of production means that you produced for yourself or for your immediate local environment at max. So there was a kind of a sharing economy in the context of your immediate local economy. Now, when you revolutionize transport, and as you know, in the domestic mode of production, it's obvious that technology was very was not advanced, right? It was, I'm not getting the word, but it was rudimentary, right? It was simple technology. And when you revolutionized technology and transport, it then made it possible to think about not producing just for yourself, but producing for the other. And over a period of time, this producing for the other meant that you never produced for yourself. Everything that you produced was out in the market, and you would then go to the market and acquire the goods that were needed for your survival. Next slide, please. So, so what happened then is these are the kinds of changes that happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution. First, that factories and large economic firms, which were run like bureaucracies, they became the dominant mode of organizing economic activity. Now, in the domestic mode of production, it was the household unit. It was the domestic unit. That was the dominant mode of organizing economic activity, because it was agriculture, you owned land, you had your own family, you had your own network, and you cultivated the land, distributed the resources within that network, right? Now, it's not to say that, you know, when you think of the domestic mode of production, it's not to say that people did not travel, or that, you know, you did not go out to sell in the market. You did. But it was all, you know, in some senses limited to certain kinds of localities and certain kinds of connections. With the factory mode of production, that was completely revolutionized. The second major shift that happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution was the separation between home and work. In the domestic mode of production, home and work were fused together. So it was the same location. And that changed with the industrial mode of production, because more and more people were working in factories outside their homes. It also meant that there was a certain kind of concentration of the population in certain areas, which led to urbanization. Now, the factories were concentrated in certain areas, again, you know, so that it was considered economical to actually build factories and these large firms in particular areas. And this is where then people started moving to and finding work, and this led to the development of more and more urban centers. Overall, then, this period is also characterized by this decline of religion as an organizing and binding force. It is, again, human reason, rationality, which drives individual motivations for what they are doing. There are two other things that we need to talk about. One is the rise of socialism and feminism. Now, a big change is in the context of women's work, because now with the factory mode of production, it's, both men and women moved out of their homes to work in factories, and women who were largely in charge of the domestic sphere now moved into the sphere, into the public sphere. And so this was a big, again, this was also a big shift in terms of how you conceive of the relationship between genders, how you conceived of the relationship between men and women. And the other was, again, related to human reason, this whole idea of distribution of resources, the rise of socialism, the idea that there is a problem with how resources were being distributed, even in the context of the Industrial Revolution. So if you think of the Industrial Revolution, you can't think of it without thinking of capitalism, right? Capitalist development, because the way in which the factories and these economic bureaucracies were organized is that the backdrop was of capitalist development. So you see, what we are doing then is introducing the ideas again that will run through the course. I said social order as one idea that will run through the course, capitalism and capitalist development that will run through the course, and thirdly, gender relations, and fourth, and
You are not audible.
Sorry. What about now?
Now
Yes,
it's
sir.
okay.
Just repeat.
From the fourth point.
Just repeat the third point. Capitalist, social order, capitalist, and then.
Yeah. So what I was saying then is that the first, the one of the central points that will run through the course is the question of social order. I have established that the context of the beginnings of the discipline are tied to questions of order. You saw how with the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, there is tremendous change in society that happens all on a sudden. And you had an earlier mode of being, of relating to each other, and that is no longer possible. You realize that that is no longer possible. So you encounter a situation where you are left with trying to figure out what the new norms of engagement will be. So when you had religion, there was a certain norm of engagement. When you don't have religion anymore, when it's reason, how do you engage with each other? Who is the figure? What is the figure of authority? When you had religion, it was the church, it was the priest; those were the figures of authority, and the king who drew his who was really the representative in a sense of God and a representative of the church, right? So so in the industrial society in after the French Revolution, there is a kind of void. You don't know what to fill the place with, where there was religion, right? There is reason, but how are the relationships? How is the system? How is it going to be worked out? So the first question was of social order, which is central to the discipline of sociology. The second is with regard to I don't remember now what I had said. I think I had said capitalism, right? Yeah, so capitalist development, that we can't look at the changes in industrial society without trying to understand capitalism. Because much of what is happening in industrial society is in the context of the capitalist logic. But I wanted to relate that to the rise of socialism, because again, with industrial society and with capitalism, you have, and through the use of human reason, you've built an understanding of the oppressiveness of the system. And here there is the emergence of socialist ideas, which means the ideas of equality, of opportunity and of resource. So who is going to control? The question of who is going to control the resources at the point of the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, clearly it's individual entrepreneurs who are controlling resources. And over a period of time, you see how that again leads to grave inequalities in society, and this gives rise to ideas of socialism. The third is the context of gender equality, and that because men and women, women had moved out of the domestic space and into the public world, this again created a very new context, and we have to then come up with ways of organizing this. So it's a new task, when you bring in a whole other population into the realm of the public. How do you reconstitute social norms? How do you reconstitute society? That is something that that becomes a concern. Okay, the next slide. Yeah, actually, I'm going to stop here, and the next slide is something that we've already discussed. But if you have any questions, we can take them up.
Ma'am, just the one question. Ma'am, the note should be handwritten, which we have to post it by today itself.
I don't insist that they have to be handwritten. You can also type them out. Yes, the last class, I think somebody has typed them. Are you all able to see the notes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, any other questions?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, Janvi.
Ma'am, actually, I wanted to ask that how is the social order restored then after every, the revolution, from theological to positive one, when people start to reason, they overcome that idea of a religion and maybe the government or monarchy, then how the order is restored? Like nowadays we see France is working fine, so how did it restored that way?
Yeah. So now with the now at the time that and one has to sort of read. I think I'm not so familiar with the history in terms of the exact details, but I can give you a general sense of how it is restored. It is that you in terms of each of these spheres, what is the political arrangement going to be like now? With the shift from monarchy, where you're saying that you no longer want a king who appropriates the resources of the people, but you am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. Yeah, Himanshu, you have put on some whiteboard or something. Is that intentional? Okay, no. Okay. So yeah, so if you think of each of these spheres, what are the spheres in which society needs to be restored? First is the political arrangements. In the political arrangement, the shift has to be made from king to a government of the people, by the people, we the people, right? So it's the shift is from a monarchy to a democracy. So you can imagine what kind of upheaval there would have been, because all the institutions that we now know, like you're talking about French society, all the institutions that are present in French society had to be rebuilt at that time. You have to rethink. So what sorts of institutions do we need? It's like thinking about India and 1947. What sorts of institutions do we need, right? So if you think of the IITs, it's part of a particular vision of engineering education, right? That the sort of leaders in that sense had at that point, which is how these institutions were built. So a big part of how society is restored is through this kind of figuring out what institutions we need, how those institutions are going to be, what sorts of laws will be framed in those institutions. And but in terms of large ideas, I think the shift is from monarchy to democracy. The shift is from control of the king to control by the people, and it was done through as we all know, universal adult franchise, so that, the right to vote, the right to elect your own representatives, that became the key idea. So now, in terms of the nitty-gritty of it, of course, it was very different, right? It was you had to have an election, you had to have, in India, for instance, it involved the tedious task of actually writing down a constitution, because we have a written constitution. So you had to, physically, that you had to think through what those, you had a drafting committee. So it's really, as basic, it's as basic as that. It's about thinking about what institutional arrangements need to be there, and then getting into the business of institutionalizing those, getting into the business of putting them into action. Yeah, so the same will go for all other arrangements. What are the economic arrangements? If I think of Industrial Revolution, again, what are the economic arrangements? And these were, again, largely the business of governments and the state and, bureaucracies at the level of the state and government, which had to come up. But first, these had to come up. I'm sure there were sort of, there are always these interim arrangements that are made. Till you can arrive at the final, you have interim arrangements. So it is through this process of, figuring out the institutional arrangements in the different spheres of life that order was restored. And now, in restoring order, again, you had a big part of that was in thinking about the rules and regulations, what the social norms were going to be. Now, if you think again of the French Revolution and after, a big shift in the social norm is that you no longer submitted to authority, because you realized that you were your own boss, right? So you are you don't need to submit to the church or to the priest or to the king. Yeah? If you look at the history of the French Revolution, and again, you will see that it involved, and that's why disorder, because it really involved the ordinary people taking over the king's castle, in a sense, right? The death of several people in this situation of conflict. So it was a sort of, why is it a revolution? The French Revolution, right? Of course, it's about a shift from a big shift from one idea to another, but it's also about a violent overthrow, right? That the kind of power and influence that the nobles, the kings had on society, that kind of power could only be dislodged through this kind of violent overthrow. So the kind of disorder then that Comte was writing about was precisely this, that there is this void, and it's only filled over a period of time as you figure out what sorts of institutional arrangements you need. But you have already figured out the large ideas, the big ideas. The big idea was a shift from monarchy to democracy. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, excuse me, ma'am. In theological thinking and metaphysical thinking, we introduced the word abstract. Ma'am, could you please explain what is the difference between abstract ideas of metaphysics and theology, because they seem similar on the surface?
The idea of what?
Abstract ideas of metaphysics and theology.
Okay.
Hello.
Sorry, I can't understand what maybe you can type your question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Anything else? Chanel, can you just go to that slide on the 3 stages?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Just a second.
Yeah. I think after this, there was one slide. It's a bit, I think the order of the slides is a bit warped in this. Yeah, here you are, this one. Okay, I have your question, Vansh. In metaphysical thinking, we use the word abstract ideas. So should there be a difference between theological thinking, as they too are just some abstract ideas? So yeah, so there is a similarity between metaphysical and theological, but the difference is that in the theological, it's very clearly uh, the supernatural powers. It's very clearly that you explain phenomena in terms of faith in God, whereas in the metaphysical you have moved from God to something else. It is an abstract entity, but you still haven't. See, the metaphysical is important to understand the positive, because it's an in-between phase. It's where people are unhappy with the idea of God and say that, okay, you can't explain everything through religion, that there is that sense which comes through. But you're still thinking in terms of these abstract entities. You're still not, moved to this point of saying, okay, it's human reason, right? It's saying that, okay, we can decide what these laws are like, right? So somewhere the metaphysical and the theological are connected, because, as you have rightly said, both are dealing with some abstract ideas. In the theological, you do not question. You just your life is organized in accordance with the Word of God. Right? You don't question the Word of God. Having faith in God means that you do not question the Word of God. So, so the supreme power is God, and those who communicate to you the Word of God. So, in this case, the Church and the King, who are representing God in this world. Now, in the metaphysical, it's similar to the theological, insofar as you are relying on abstract entities and abstract ideas, but it is not, that abstract entity is not necessarily God. So you begin to question whether everything can be explained in terms of your faith in God, or whether there are other sorts of explanations that can be used. And I have put, I thought that fate could be an example of this, where it's not clearly a belief in God, but it borders on the belief in something, but it is still an abstract idea which is used to explain what is happening in our lives. Does that answer your question, Vansh? Okay. Any other questions? So I'm going to see you at 1 o'clock. I'll send out the link. I don't know how that'll work though. I think all of you will again get it if yeah, you will all get the link, but just group 1 should join. But the other thing is that several of you have written to me about the timings. Now, as I've said before, it's all right to attend with whichever group you want to. But when you submit, you make sure you submit in the group that you're assigned, because what we've done is we create separate links for each group, so that corrections and keeping track is easier. So just remember that even though you may be attending with group 4, if you've originally been allotted group 1, you make your submission in the group 1 folder. So please watch the video and then frame sort of think about it a little bit in terms of what we've been discussing in class, in terms of the sociological imagination, and then we will have a discussion. So the tutorial, as you know, I'm not going to be lecturing, it's not one person speaking. All of you will have to, come up with your sort of understanding of the video and what you draw from it. Only then it'll be a successful tutorial. All right.
Ma'am, today
Yeah.
the tutorial is for group 1.
Is it? I don't know. I'll have to look at the chart. I don't know. I'll have to look at the chart. And should I just, maybe I can post a message on the Teams?
Yes, ma'am.
But if you look at the slotting pattern, it should tell you which group it is.
Slotting pattern में तो मतलब ये academics पे हर दिन ही दिखाता है वो.
नहीं, हर दिन कैसे दिखाएगा? So Monday is, we are A, so it's 4.
Okay, ma'am.
1 to 150. Monday is TA 4. Tuesday is TA 1. Thursday is TA 2. And Friday is TA 3.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, so we will stop the recording. Should have